Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Standing Committee on Policy and Public Strategy. Now, without further ado, I would just like to point out that the City of Dieppe recognizes that the land on which it operates is part of the unceded traditional ancestral lands of the Mi'kmaq. I will ask my colleagues to recite this prayer with me. Dear colleagues, let's have the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So welcome everyone to this meeting. Now, this is a bit different from a regular council meeting. This is an information session, if you will. And information sessions usually take place on the third Monday of each month. And it's an opportunity each time for staff and members of the public to come and present things to us. And this evening, this is something that we've been waiting for a long time. The councillors have been waiting for it, staff as well, and citizens as well. So let's begin. I'm going to ask Mr. Melançon to take over the presentation, and he'll be talking to us for a good part of this evening. All right, thank you. Hello to the public, councillors, and so this evening, we're very happy to see you out in large numbers. We would like to present this tree bylaw project, and here's what we have planned for this evening. So first of all, the presentation will be done by municipal staff. Our director of the environment will be making the presentation, and the goal of the presentation is to give us the broad outline, of the bylaw. So it's a summary of what the bylaw would contain. No decisions will be made this evening. The decisions will be made on May 8th at the meeting, and there will be more details on the bylaw that will be presented at that meeting. On May 8th, the intention is to proceed to first and second reading of the bylaw. And then once the council is comfortable, then we'll proceed to adopt the bylaw. And so that all that will be done on May 8th. So that'll be May 8th is an important step in this process. But there will be other reflection and other thought given to this project. Now, after the presentation, councillors will be able to give their thoughts and ask questions, and people in the public will be able to do the same thing afterwards. So we'll start with the council, because this is a bylaw that's being presented to councillor, but then the public will have an opportunity to ask questions, and it will be facilitated by Mayor Lepierre. So tonight is about the proposed tree bylaw, and I would like to ask the Director of Environment now to speak to us. He has worked very hard on this project, and his team has as well. He will give us an overview of the proposed tree bylaw. Thank you, Marc. Thank you, councillors, and thank you to the members of the public. It's a privilege this evening for me to present the results of the past year's work on urban tree management. So the urban forest is made up of all the trees that are found in Dieppe, so those on city-owned land and on private land. And it's important that everyone does their part to protect this important resource for everyone. Now, as you know, many residents have shared their concerns over the past 2 years about the importance of trees in our city. A number of consultations were held, and a consultant forestry engineer, Bruno Chicoine, was hired, and he proposed various options to the city in October 2021. A survey conducted in January 2022 showed that most respondents support the consultant's recommendations. Now, in recent months, a great deal of research has been done with other experts and other Canadian municipalities that have had a tree bylaw for many years, 5, 10, 15 years in some cases. And what emerged was that a tree bylaw is an essential tool in urban forestry management, that there are different variations in tree cutting regulations, and that all the municipalities consulted continue to refine their bylaws even decades after adopting one. So what we're presenting today is a result of all the work that we've done, and it's a very ambitious collective project. So we currently have a few regulations to protect our trees, the tree code, which protects only trees on municipal property, the zoning bylaw, which requires new projects to include landscaping with some trees, and there are conditions as well for certain industrial and commercial sectors. Currently, the city does not have a bylaw to encourage preservation of trees or require the replacement of trees cut on private property. So tonight we're here to present a project that seeks to balance the protection of trees and development aimed at addressing the housing shortage in our city. The aim is not to prevent cutting everywhere, but to frame the practice so that it's done in a thoughtful way. And we also believe that our proposal addresses the major concerns of our community and those of council. So urban trees are important not only for landowners, but for the community as a whole. So we all have a role to play in protecting them. It helps to protect the biodiversity of the plants and animals in our cities rather, for future generations. Trees help to reduce excessive heat in urban areas, and they help to purify the air and absorb CO2, which reduces the amount of gas in the atmosphere and helps to limit climate change. So concretely, the objectives of the bylaw would be to encourage the protection of healthy trees and groups of trees, incorporate tree management into project planning early in the process, offset tree cutting and development with stricter planting regulations, and thereby increase the number of trees in the city. Now, any tree cutting on private land would require authorization from the municipality. That's the basis of the proposed bylaw. According to our research, we would be the first municipality in Atlantic Canada to have such a bylaw, and this is a major shift in behavior to protect our trees that will require everyone's cooperation. So I just want to spend a bit of time on what we mean by tree. So trees have to have a diameter of 10 centimeters at chest height. That's the standard measurement. So 1.3 meters from the ground. 10 centimeters is about the width of my hand, maybe a little bit bigger than this puck that I'm holding here. And we also would like to focus on trees of interest. So they have to have a diameter of 30 centimeters. So a little bit bigger than what I'm holding here. And we want these trees would have to be in health. They would not, they have to be healthy and not pose an immediate hazard. We would also pay attention to wooded areas of interest, and they would not be invasive species either. So what does that mean? This means that no one can break or destroy a tree within city limits without requesting a certificate of authorization. That it would include the cutting of many branches and also groundwork that may affect the roots and the survival of the tree. Cutting would be permitted when a certificate of authorization is issued or with or without specific conditions. To obtain a permit, the trees would need to be assessed, and the permit would then have conditions attached to it, such as the protection of certain trees, replanting, or fees to be paid if the trees are not planted on the site. We'll go into more detail on the process, and I'll give some examples later in the presentations. But again, really the details will be presented on May 8th when we do a full reading of the bylaw. So a few activities would be exempted from requiring a certificate prior to cutting. So first of all, trees smaller than 10 centimeters in diameter, unless the trees have been planted as part of a requirement. Crown land, federal or provincial property would not be affected. And surveying or service line maintenance activities and operations related to the operation of orchards, maple groves, and nurseries would not be affected either. For trees that pose an immediate risk to safety, where we have to really respond quickly, cutting would be permitted and there would be no charge for these cases, but a certificate of authorization would have to be issued afterwards with supporting documents, photos, experts' reports, and so forth, any information that could be relevant. Mainly, the purpose is to avoid this reason being used as an excuse and also to be able to keep statistics on tree loss. So it'll allow us to document things like tropical storms. It'll allow us to kind of ascertain the number of trees that were lost and so forth. For land in rural areas or in the new annexed territory, we would require a cutting declaration to document the tree cutting. So there would be no need for a permit. They would just have to tell us that trees have been cut down or would be cut. And it would be within the urban perimeter. But the maps and the details will be presented again on May 8th. Certificates of authorization would have to be applied for with the city prior to cutting trees or doing any work that may affect roots or branches so that we can assess the project and guide the applicant towards the best possible practices. We really want to ensure that each tree cut is done in a responsible and thoughtful manner based on internationally recognized criteria. A tree study or an assessment of trees would be carried out by qualified experts to determine which trees can be preserved, such as trees of interest, wooded areas in good condition, and which can or would have to be cut down, such as diseased or dangerous trees. And it's with a tree study that the city would be able to determine the conditions for the certificate of authorization. So cutting of trees and branches may be permitted for projects such as real estate construction, fencing, patios, etc. But it would have to be accompanied for the most part by conditions such as replanting of trees, depending on the type of development, and whether there are trees of interest that are cut down. And a minimum of one tree would be expected to be planted per dwelling unit or block of commercial space. And what we're hoping is that each family, each household would have their tree. Minimum planting would also be required for new streets. And to encourage preservation, if the project planned to retain groups of trees or trees of interest, well, then the replanting requirements would be lower. There would be a system of credits when trees are protected. Now, if planting was not possible on the site, a fee would be collected to contribute to this city's tree planting funds. So to ensure that there is greenery all throughout the city. Protective measures would also be required to ensure the survival of trees retained on or near the property. And what we see on here is protective measures to protect trees. Fines. Well, fines would be issued for cutting a tree without a permit, cutting branches or roots that result in the death of a tree, or if the permit holder did not respect the conditions for protecting or planting trees. Now, of course, the first step would be to inform this resident. It would be a gradual process, and issue warnings when necessary, but the bylaw would still provide for fines when necessary. So before going any further, let me summarize what I've said. So any tree cutting, branch cutting, or potential impact to roots would have to be authorized by the municipality. The proposed bylaw would aim to regulate the cutting of trees based on recognized practices and require the replanting of trees depending on the type of project. All right, so what's the process going to look like? So prior to starting a construction project, a subdivision, or removing a tree, an application for a tree cutting permit would have to be made to the municipality. An expert would then visit the site to conduct a tree study. This study would be provided by the city, but now if there was a delays, it would also be possible for an applicant to submit their own study if it was done by a qualified person following the city's guidelines. Recommendations such as tree replanting would be shared with the applicant, who would be required to submit a deposit for the trees to be planted or protected during the work. And there would be a guaranteed deposit to make sure that all trees that were supposed to be replanted would be replanted. The applicant would then receive a certificate authorizing him or her to cut the trees designated in the tree study. Now, if all the conditions were met, the deposit would be returned. And as the waiting period for a permit application could be as long as 20 working days, and that's what we're aiming at, it would be recommended that you incorporate this early into your project planning. And I'm going to give some examples, fictitious examples. We're not going to look at specific cases today, but I want to show you what we're going to be looking at with the different measures, or what we're looking at with the different measures. So here we have so there would be a application made, tree study, there would be recommendations for preservation and if we would look at if any trees need to be cut down, there would be recommendations. There would be sharing with the developer, and the final step would be protection and planting commissions that would come with the certificate of authorization. So what we'd be aiming at is better protection of trees between lots and replanting as well on each of the land properties there. Here's another example. So these are what we see here is so there would be we might have trees of interest in the red area. There would be opportunities for conserving some of the trees, but there would be technical issues. There are technical issues for utilities for the third property in the at the bottom of the screen. So there would be and so here's the final result. Some trees may be preserved, but some trees would have to be cut down. But at that time, that there would be compensation or an offsetting. Here's another more complex project. Again, there would be a tree study. We would identify the trees of interest, the groups of trees that could be preserved either for the residents or for the municipality. There would be recommendations and then conditions. And then the goal would be to have a better presence of trees before and after construction. So the idea would be that trees would be planted or conserved right from the beginning. And the desired effect is to have areas of the cities that are good to live in, that are enjoyable to live in. So there's two pictures here. On one side there was no preservation of trees, and in the other side we have another example, Beaconsville, which was the city that we consulted. They have regulations that are very interesting, and we actually based our bylaw on part of what they were doing. So here in Beaconsfield, there is a very interesting canopy for the residents that live in that city. Another example, Oakville, which is another community that we consulted as we were developing our bylaw. So here we have two neighborhoods that were built in the early 2000s with strict replanting regulations. And after 20 years, you see that you have trees that have grown quite a bit. But in the picture below in Dieppe, there was no specific requirement for trees. Some residents may decide to plant trees, but it's very limited. Practices to avoid. So what we're looking at, or what we want to avoid, are neighborhoods that are completely devoid of trees, or preservation choices that would, where at the right we see that there was I'm not sure that the right choice was made to preserve trees rather. So we want to establish good practices and a good decision-making process for everyone. So the aims of the bylaw are to encourage the protection of healthy trees and groups of trees, to incorporate tree management into project planning early in the process, offset tree cutting and development with stricter planting regulations, and to ultimately increase the number of trees. So what are the next steps? So starting tomorrow, you can visit dieppe.ca to view the backgrounder if you haven't, if you don't take it this evening here in the room. And tonight's presentation will be put up on the website as well. There will be a form where you can leave your comments and feedback. So we ask that you direct all your comments to the web page so that we can consider them in our analysis. Really, those are the only comments that we'll be compiling and presenting to council. Next, the draft will go to public reading on May 8th, as Marc said. That's when the entire bylaw will be made public, and councillors will be able to ask questions about each section of the bylaw if they wish. Then after that, the draft bylaw will not be adopted until a subsequent meeting to determine if any changes need to be made. The final decision rests with the council at those final readings. The information websites will be enhanced with more information when the draft bylaw is tabled on May 8th, and you'll be able to consult that. And comments will be received until May 19th, and then we'll gather them and share them with, and conduct our analysis on them. So basically, if we want to succeed in being the first city in Atlantic Canada to implement a tree bylaw that affects city and private lands like this one, that will require the collaboration of everyone, residents, property owners, developers, merchants, and the city. It's going to take a lot of awareness and education because it's a huge cultural shift. Patience as well, because the concrete results of this bylaw won't be visible for several years, not immediately visible. And finally, we will analyze the process during its application to see if improvements need to be made. And as I said, the cities that we consulted, even after 50 years of having a bylaw, continue to work on improving their regulations. So what we're proposing is based on concrete measures that have proven to be effective and that will help us achieve our environmentally responsible vision for the city of Dieppe. So thank you very much for listening to me. And I hand the mic back to the mayor. Thank you, Alexandre. Are there any questions from councillors? Mr. Councillor Lanting. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Alexandre. It was an excellent presentation. Great work done. I like what I see. And there's a good framework here for our trees. Now we'll have to work on some of the details, of course, but I'm also anxious to hear the comments from others. But I'm very happy with what I see. I do have a few questions though. So when you're saying that rural areas and the new annexed territory will not be subject to the regulations, but they're part of the city. So I would like to know what the rationale is there. Well, it's logistical for logistical reasons. We really wanted to focus on the city where there's a development pressure. In the rural areas, why zoning does not allow for intense densification and development. There's farming activity. Farmers need to cut trees, but we want them to document it when they do it. And we will look to gradually integrate our processes. But we wanted to focus on tree loss rather in the city itself. Well, because those areas are part of the city, I think we would have to uh, have the bylaw apply to them as well. Now, in terms of fines and permits and the number of trees per square meter and things like that, I imagine that detail will be coming soon with the bylaw being written. Or has that already been determined? Yeah, all those details are determined. It's in the bylaw. We have a bylaw that contains 40 sections, so it's very detailed. All right, my last question, because I want to leave time for others to ask questions. Now, if I understood properly, you'll need a permit to trim branches. I have a tree on my property, and if I want to, cut 2 or 3 branches that are too long, will I have to get a permit for that, or? Well, we set a threshold. So if if you're cutting more than 25% of the branches, that could endanger the tree. And if a tree dies and it's because of branch cutting, that will be a problem. Okay, but I won't have to come and get a permit for cutting 1 or 2 branches. Well, especially dead branches too. You can cut those. All right, perfect. That's all for me. This is an excellent start, and I'm And it's fun that we're a leader in this area too, as well. We can be innovative. Right. Councillor Godet. Thank you, Your Worship. A very good presentation. I have a few questions. Where did we get that 10 centimeter diameter figure? Oh, did you finish your question? Okay. Well, the consultant had said that some regulations talk about 5 centimeters and some 10. I saw some regulations or bylaws that talk about 15. So we kind of set an average, but that's something that we can adjust as well. Uh, but if we want to have big trees, we have to start with small trees. So that's why we set 10 centimeters. My second question is this: a tree study. How many people in the city would be qualified to conduct those studies? Well, most trees that do, or most companies that do tree work already have people that would be qualified to do those studies. I contacted those people when we were doing consultations, and there are 15 or so companies that have expertise in that area. So, all right. So will it be the residents' responsibility to hire somebody? No, the city will offer it. We have internal capacity, and we're recruiting people as well to be able to do that work. But while we're waiting to hire someone, we'll probably hand that work off to a consultant, and the city will cover the costs. Uh, if somebody wants to go a little further, if they want to progress, they can hire someone as well, provided that that person follows the guidelines that are set out in the tree study. Thank you, Councillor Godet. Councillor Turgeon-Roy.
Merci, Monsieur le maire. Merci, Alexandre, la belle
Thank you,
présentation.
Alexandre, for this great presentation. I have two questions for you.
Lorsqu'on parle d'amende,
When we're talking about
est-ce que
fines,
ça, c'est sûr, ça va être défini dans l'arrêté?
okay, that's going to be
Est-ce
defined
qu'on
in the
considère
bylaw,
des
but
coûts assez
are
significatifs?
are the fines
Des
quite
histoires
significant?
que
I've heard
peu de
stories
monde
in other
connaissent l'amende après,
cities,
là.
where people say, "Well, I'm going to cut the tree
C'est
down
une
and then just pay the
estimation.
fine after." Did you
Oui.
take that into consideration, that type of situation? Great.
Les autres
Yes.
choses,
Okay. Second thing,
l'arrêté, une fois qu'elle sera
the
adoptée, je ne
bylaw,
sais pas,
once
là,
it's adopted, we don't know when it's going to be
ça va être
adopted, but
aussi sur les terrains qui sont
that'll
plus
apply to
considérables.
undeveloped work as well that are purchased by developers. That'll apply to them as well. Yes, there will be a grace period for people who already have approved projects, um, but it will eventually apply to all
Donc,
tree
s'il y a
cutting.
un projet qui n'a pas été
All right.
encore
So if there's a
signé,
project that
à
hasn't yet
partir
been
de là,
submitted,
parfait, c'est bien.
then they
Merci.
will be covered by that bylaw. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Councillor
Merci, Monsieur
Boudreau.
le maire.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Merci pour la
Thank
présentation.
you for the
Aujourd'hui, on
presentation.
s'attendait, on est
We've
vraiment
been waiting for
content
this for a
d'avoir
long
ta
time, and
candidature.
I'm very happy that we're here.
Euh,
We're
J'ai deux
finally there.
questions.
So I have two
On a
questions.
parlé d'arbres envahissants.
We talked about
Qu'est-ce qui
invasive
va être
trees.
la recommandation qui va être faite aux
What's
développeurs
the
pour
recommendation
voir,
that will be
souvent
made to
on entend entreprises
developers?
arboricoles
Because there'll be tree studies that'll be
sur le
conducted
terrain.
on the
Lorsqu'on
land.
identifie un arbre qui est
And if
envahissant,
you identify an
à la limite,
invasive species or a diseased tree
dans le fond, compétitionne avec les espèces
that is
indigènes,
competing with indigenous
qu'est-ce qu'on va leur
species,
recommander à ces
what are you
développeurs
going to recommend? What are we going to
d'enlever
recommend
ces
to
arbres-là
developers to cut the trees down
entamés, même s'ils sont très
first and
avancés?
foremost, even if the trees are mature? What do you have in mind? Well, of course, it'll depend on the situations, but there's not a lot of invasive tree species here. Um, but if disease trees, we might ask cutting them down to avoid propagation of those trees. If we think of elm disease and other diseases, we'll be recommending that those trees be cut as soon as possible to avoid contamination. And there's also the Norway maple that's not a problem in the urban setting, but competes with maple trees in rural settings. So, but
C'est
we'll
bien parce
we'll
qu'on
look
va
at that.
pouvoir voir la santé de
That's
nos
great. Well, because we'll be able to
arbres
see how healthy
et la santé
our
de
tree
nos
stands are as
végétaux.
well.
Combien on va viser à l'interne d'avoir des
How
experts comme le
how
chirurgien
many
dentiste
experts, internal experts, do we hope to
Est-ce
have?
que
I know we're going to
vous
be
visez à
calling
avoir deux
upon
ou trois
external experts. Are you looking at two or
Comment
three
ça se
employees?
répartit les hommes
How
pour
many
les
would be
femmes?
enough to be effective? Well, we're looking right now at one full-time person to manage the bylaw, and we're hoping to ask somebody uh, to have somebody else to kind of to so we're aiming to have eventually have two people, one that would kind of look after the management and one that would enforce the bylaw.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Merci, Alexandre, pour la
Thank you, Your
présentation.
Worship, and thank you, Alexander, for your presentation. As Councillor Boudreau mentioned, we've been waiting for it for a long time, and I really like what I heard. Now, I'd like to know if we are going to get more details or developers who want to develop a development next to another development. Are we going to make them leave a buffer zone between these two developments, between two zones that are very different, one from the other, a single family dwellings and multifamily? Well, there are already bylaws on that in terms of mixed use. Now, in terms of wooded areas, woodlots, if these woodlots are to be preserved, if we preserve them and the trees are old and diseased and they all start falling, if it's a risk for the citizens, well, no, then so it depends on the case, of course. But if you, it could be what a recommendation you say you have to leave a certain margin of trees at the back of the lot, for example, and yes, so it will balance out. Well, before we issue a permit, will we inspect the woodlot, the wooded area, to make sure? Yes, that is the objective here. Thank you, Councillor Goodbull. Thank you. Yeah, and I agree with the other councillors, and I'd like to thank you for your presentation. The bylaw you're presenting is really the cornerstone of the cornerstone that we need to attain the vision that we have for our city. But it's also an element of a number of other bylaws. So I'm glad that you referred to other bylaws that are going to follow, but we're starting with this one here. And now, for example, things that we've already done. We've When we look at purchasing lots, we looked at trails and we want greener areas around the trails, and all of this will be added to this bylaw, but this is a big element of the whole picture. Now, the vision of a rural area rather than the urban area. I'm glad that you're still going to monitor what's going on in the rural areas, because I think we have to monitor the green canopy, the green cover within the whole city. And I'm happy to see that it's something that you added. I do have a question. Now, I might have more questions once I've read the bylaw, once I've seen the details, but for right now, the costs of this bylaw, financial costs for the city, for the administration of this bylaw, what might this represent as an additional burden? Have we assessed the possible costs that might be associated to this? I'm in favor, but I'd like to know what it's going to cost the city. Well, as I mentioned, we hope to hire two people to manage, one full-time. So it would be a full salary with benefits, and we want another person that will look after this, but also will be responsible for other initiatives. So we have two full-time salaries here. And once we have these people, well, then we won't need to hire contractors, outside consultants, so the cost will be included in the salaries. But meanwhile, we have service agreements with a few consultants and in the field, and we're talking about a couple of $100 for each assessment of each tree. So that's the cost. And we also, depending, because of the size of our city compared to other cities that we looked at, I think we're going to have probably 200 to 300 permit applications per year. So, well, is the idea here to use the revenue from the fines to compensate for our costs, or are the fines going to go into kind of a trust fund for replanting? the fees for trees that are not replanted on the same site, that will go into the replanting fund. Now, the fines, that goes to another account. I can't answer that right now. But if the penalties for those who don't plant their trees on their own lot, on their own site, that's going to go into a separate pot, and that will be strictly for replanting. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lantaigne, a second time around. Second round, yeah. Thank you. Yes, something just came to mind. Now, for the trails, we have a number of trails throughout the city. Many of them go through woods. I know we already have rules in place. We leave a certain number of meters, a 6-meter buffer. Is it? Are we going to try and strengthen that rule and perhaps add a little more? Make it wider to avoid what happened along Tranquille and Centrale. We had this great trail that was protected by trees on both sides. Is there a way that we can strengthen this to make sure that our trails remain wooded as much as possible, first of all? And secondly, when we have development, the developer has to put up, is it 10%? 10%? So once again, can we strengthen that to make sure that as far as possible that 10%, and we talked about it earlier, that if there are houses that are back to back, for example, that we have them leave a line of trees in the back, for example, to protect the privacy between two lots. So I have two questions there. Well, yeah, for the trails, as well as when we create lands for public purposes, we've just added an extra analysis to that. We are going to encourage the landowners to maintain their trees on their private lots that are not they're not necessarily the responsibility of the city, but if we share the cost of the responsibility of these trees with the private sector, well, first of all, we've just enhanced our green canopy, and it's a good use of tax dollars. Now, for the trails, yes, that's part of the recommendation. That's the kind of forest is more open to trees falling because of the wind. So we are going to recommend a greater width of buffer trees to preserve trees. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And if you allow me to add something, yeah, we have a master plan for the trails and for parks and fields. So with this tree study, we're going to be able to look at all aspects of green spaces and public spaces, and it has to integrate with the master plan. So each situation is going to be different, but we have to adjust according to the trees of interest and the development being proposed for each lot. So we have to be able to adapt to each situation, but keeping our master plan in mind. So there are other plans and documents that come into play. Thank you. I don't see any other councillors, so we'll take questions from the public. We'll start slowly but surely. I would ask you to make sure that you don't ask a question that's already been asked when you come up to the mic, because I will be polite, but I will ask you to move on to your next question if that's the case. So, and please identify yourself.
Vous identifier
Please
quand
identify yourself when you come to the microphone so that we can either follow up with you if you have a specific question or for our records. Thank you.
I live on 98 Tranquille, and I'm really excited about this project for City in Atlantic Canada. But the question I have is, for me, we've let the horses out of the barn and we're closing the doors. So for the people who live along Tranquil and Centril, where our trail has been devastated, what plans do we have in place for that? Is there anything that we can put in this to, encourage, some plantings along the city property? I've already planted some this weekend on my own property, some trees that I got, but along the city property or maybe the developer side of the property, is there anything we can do in the bylaw for that? And the second question, just so I can sit down, is what about situations where we have a development that's already been done? It's been built, like the one behind me, like they just mowed the trees down. It looks like hell. Is there anything that we can put in the bylaw to make sure that developer does the right thing and replants trees in those communities? Because what is there right now looks terrible. So those are my questions. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mark.
Merci, je sais pas qui
Thank you. I'm not sure which staff will answer this question. Who can better answer the question? Alexandre, perhaps? The other Alexandre? There we have Alexander number 1 and Alexander number 2. Number 1. Thank you.
The level of question here is, I think my colleague Alexandre alluded to, is that the objective here of this new proposed bylaw is to encourage, the plantation of trees for new development. So on existing developments, I think that there's a question of, if it's been established and if it's met the criterias of the existing bylaws that are in place, then that those can continue as they were. There are a lot of situations that across the municipality where people have not necessarily planted trees per se, and I don't think that the intent here is to go back in time and force individuals to plant trees on their property. But I think the objective here is to encourage new practices moving forward, and as well as keeping in mind that the municipalities will intervene when there is an opportunity to plant trees on public properties once there's a full evaluations that has been accomplished for certain situations. So I understand the situation that's taken place on Tranquil, and perhaps in the future, and I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but perhaps in the future that these areas, certainly along the public right of way for the path, that it will be a great opportunity to take some of the funds that we will accumulate with this bylaw and to plant and to start improving some of these areas. So I hope that answers the question.
Just maybe to add to what Alexandre was saying, that yes, the funds that will be received for those that have to pay for a permit or not replanting trees, we will be planting trees in strategic places. So along trail system, along the streets. So that will be one initiative that the city will be doing. And also specifically to Tranquil Street, the construction that is happening there, the developer will have to plant trees also in part of the agreement that he has with us. So trees will be planted in the near future after construction is over. So that's part of the agreement that that developer has with the city. So the number of trees, I don't have the numbers today, but this bylaw is for the future. So we can't unfortunately change what's been done in the past, but we can certainly move forward and have actions in the right direction.
Merci. Bonsoir.
Oui, mon nom c'est Monique
Thank
Chiasson.
you. My name is Monique Chiasson and I live at 46 Tranquille. I love the presentation. Thank you. I don't agree with you that you say that nothing is being done on Tranquille, and I'm glad, Marc, that you're saying that the developer is going to have to plant some trees. But I would like to know now, to ask exactly what is going to be planted, and I'd like the city to plant along the trail on the Tranquille side, but also on the side of the former woods, because it's really not pretty to look at. It really has decreased our property values We were lucky to have 20 years or more. We had all these trees in our backyard, or 20 acres of trees, and to have them just clear cut, it was just terrible. But we can't replant what was there, but we have to make sure that we fix what is there now. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Good evening. My name is Véronique Cormier. I live on Barachois Street in Dieppe. I have two questions. The first, I was wondering, when you talk about protecting trees, are you also focusing on forests? Because, of course, trees individually are better than nothing, but forests are a major element of the whole ecosystem. So are they going to be included in the plan? Yes, as I mentioned, the conservation of wooded areas, woodlots, is going to be important. So there is a description of what a stand of trees means, what it means, how to preserve it. That's going to be included in all of the information given in a tree study. Now, the encouragement of protecting these stands is that it's going to uh, reduce the requirement to replant more trees at the end. So they're going to be rewarded if they maintain, if they preserve wooded areas like these stands of trees that are of larger trees. So we're trying to find a balance in all this. So you're not talking about preserving large forests, large urban forests. Well, that's part of our master plan, our parks and so on. So the projects that are underway on private lots will come under this bylaw, but everything that is on public lands, we continue to manage these lands. And in terms of the tree study, I was wondering, are the results of the tree studies going to be shared with the residents of Dieppe? Are they going to be public documents? Good question. I'm not sure. I think that remains to be seen. I think if I look at our people in engineering, Mr. Simard, perhaps. Good evening. I'm responsible for access to information at the city, and it's a question we've already received. We're looking at it right now. If possible, yes, we will make it public. That's our objective. But of course, we have to respect the the act on right to information and privacy. So I don't have an answer right now for you. We are reviewing it. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Good evening, Your Worship, councillors. Paul Dodo on Isabel Street. Very interesting what we heard, what was shared here this evening. The only warning I'd like to give with the new territories, the newly annexed territories that will not be subject to the same conditions or the same rules as what I'm going to call Old Dieppe. That makes me wonder if I'm a developer, is that where I'm going to go, first of all, because I won't have to follow the rules, the same rules. So I'm going to go cut to my heart's content outside of the urban boundary. So I think it's important to, I mean, there's a lot of nice forest out there, and I'm hoping that we want to make sure that nothing is done that will run counter to the spirit, at least, of what is going to be within the existing territory of Dieppe. So perhaps you should review that to see if that you're not opening up a can of worms here. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Well, as I mentioned, because of the different zoning areas, it's much more restrictive within it, and that's why we focus really on the urban boundary. In the annexed territory, there you have to, outside of the urban boundary in the rural areas or the newly annexed, you still have to declare your cut. But basically we have to learn to walk before we run. So I think we're going to move ahead one step at a time, but it is something we'll keep our eyes out on. Hi, I live at 320 Lavoie. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you. We really didn't believe in it, but now we do. It's not the same person we talked to 6 months ago. No, well, I wasn't here 6 months ago. I'm here now. I have a number of questions. But now I have a question on the tree study, one that wasn't asked yet. Is this study going to be conducted before the drainage plan and the whole plan for the infrastructure? Because sometimes certain projects are approved, everything is cut, and then they determine the drainage plan. And the drainage plan, they talk about retention basins and the topography of the soil. So will that be done before or after the tree study? Well, good question. Yes, that is something that's going to be done right at the beginning of the analysis of a project. If a person doesn't have a tree study yet, that's the first thing we're going to ask for. And the drainage plan will be adapted based on what is preserved. The ones who are responsible for drainage plans can take into consideration the fact that a forest is conserved. What does it mean in terms of the rainfall absorption? And we'll have a better integration of all of these practices with the retention basins that are more natural, that are less man-made. That all discussions that will be held during the tree study. I was wondering if we could have an idea of the current tree canopy, and do we have a certain objective, an index, a canopy index that we're aiming for? Do we have a map of Dieppe to see where the canopy, because we have the Rotary Park on the one hand and we have a couple of smaller parks here and there, but can we see where the hot spots are? Can we see what we're aiming at? Well, yes, there was a student from the University of Moncton. Oh, this coming summer, a student from the University of Moncton is going to help us with this, and we're going to look at the canopy. Yes, that'll be done this summer. And I'm not saying that we have any figures yet or any objectives, but we will be looking at it and we'll be using that. But we have people who will be hired to manage this bylaw. And I have another question. Perhaps it refers back to, how did you call it again? The master plan. Is it in the master plan, the city's master plan, to purchase, or perhaps in partnership or alone, to purchase these urban forests in order to make sure that we have a better distributed canopy throughout the city? Because we can, even as a citizen, as a philanthropist, I can adopt a stretch of the Trans-Canada Highway, or we can adopt a fire hydrant. But can the city give the example and say, adopt a stand of trees, adopt it, doesn't have to be huge, but so that people can participate and benefit from the forest. I don't know if that's in the master plan, and I understand we need trees, but can we have a bigger and better, and can we have do we have a future vision of what the city will look like? Well, that is something that will be considered, but for the bylaw right now, we're going to look towards adopting a system that will allow us to manage this. Now, people in parks and recreation will also be a part of the consultation when lands for public purposes are created, and then we'll have a better idea of which lands to choose with the tree study, but I can't say any more at this time. but you recognize that there's a difference between a woodlot and a children's park with artificial turf and a playground and you know and the marsh area, which isn't really a forest. Okay, okay. But can I continue? Can I continue on? Well, yeah, it's all included, same price. So, do we know the difference between a mature tree compared to a newly planted tree? And I know you know, but sometimes we get the impression that even in the it, you said that in the examples you gave us, okay, the third house they had to cut the large tree. Okay, well we're going to replant one, but before the trees are mature to how many how long do they take to do the job of a mature tree? I mean, it's it's we don't want people to say, okay, well yeah, go ahead, cut what you want. We're going to replant anyhow. I mean, do we recognize the importance of mature trees? Well, yes, it will be recognized in the ratio of replanting. It'll be a higher ratio of replanting if a larger tree has to be cut. We're going to ask people to avoid cutting uh, from the start, but sometimes you have restrictions that you can't avoid it, and so that's why we gave these examples. But the bylaw does provide for a higher compensation, a higher fee paid for larger trees. The larger the tree, the higher the fee that will be paid. And this is my last point. Trees of interest and trees of specific interest, like 100-year-old trees. And I asked a few months ago, I was told it's fine to cut down 100-year-old tree because it's going to die soon anyhow. And that hurt me. That hurt me personally. And people, I said that to myself, if people at the city think this, well, we've got a long way to go. But I saw that some municipalities bother to do an inventory of the trees that they have on their territory, majestic trees because of their beauty, their history, their canopy, their value, their age. Did we think of doing something like that to develop an inventory? I mean, it sounds crazy, but if the city of Ottawa was able to do it, we should be able to do it here. And if we know what we have, perhaps we'll be able to better understand its value and better protect it. So I just can't imagine that a tree, even an old tree, if it's healthy, it's healthy, and it's not worth 12 new trees planted 10 feet apart between two stretch of pavement. So I just don't, I can't get my head around the fact that it's okay to cut 100-year-old tree and then just compensate by planting a dozen new ones. But so I mean, it's we could add it to our tourist brochures and to our list of assets here if we had an inventory. Yes, that is something that we could consider in the bylaw. Of course, we have to manage our resources. We have to start by walking before we run. But having an inventory of all our trees, 100-year-old trees, that is something that we could add. Yes, and I'm quite aware of it. I'm quite sensitive to this whole issue. Yes, thank you. Are you going to stay here with us? Thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Marc Lantaigne. No, I'm the other Marc Lantaigne. I'm the other Marc Lantaigne. I don't know if we can have two. Well, we've had two for a long time now. Maybe there might even be three. So I have two questions. My first, and I don't want to go into the what's already been discussed, but are you going to have technical information on the desirable trees and the less desirable trees, the ones that are less resistant to disease and insects? Yeah, we already have a list of species that are desirable, that shouldn't be planted in certain areas, in more invasive species, that will be provided to the citizens and to developers. There will be a toolbox.
C'était, est-ce que vous prévoyez éventuellement vous allez comptabiliser tous les arbres et tout, là, le couvert arboricole?
Do you now are you going to be calculating the carbon sequestration and or carbon capture of the trees? That's a good question. We are working with our consultant, and that is definitely one of the things that we can be looking at. I don't know if I said where I live, but 39 Robichaud is where I live. Next question. Your Worship, councillors, my name is Charles Poirier. I live in Barachois, but I don't want to be booed. I'm a developer, but I'm a developer here in Dieppe. I hope that you see me as someone who's concerned with trees as well. Yes, and you received a national award too, so I just wanted to point that out for that on that very topic. You know, I recognize that all of this is in recognition to clear cutting, and I recognize that we have work to do, and we have a ways to come. But I hope that you didn't work in a silo. So, for example, trees between houses that are back to back, the drainage plan requires that there has to be drainage in all lots. And when we say drainage, well, then you have to dig, and trees it's difficult to keep trees in those situations. Now, everybody here, and me included, we love trees. We love the trees that we have, but we're a city that's growing. We have to make room not only for the people who are here there, but people who want to come to our cities and our city and settle here. So, I've been thinking a lot of I've been thinking about lots of things during this presentation. Engineering, conservation, both can work together. They can come together in projects that in the projects that we were shown. But I hope that we will do this by taking all these into consideration. So maybe rather than focus just on single individual trees, maybe we can focus on groups of we're already required to set aside 10% of lots for trees. So yes, you can work around trees without clear cutting. I know that can be done. So I think it's good to have regulations to recognize that fact. And so that clear cutting doesn't become the norm. You know, when you say you want to start, when you start a new project, you can't just have carte blanche and do whatever you want. You have to have regulations. So basically, that's what I wanted to say. I just hope that you will recognize that there are other people who want to come to the city. We have to develop certain parts of the city. We're talking about private lots. These are lots that have cost a lot, and we have to be able to get some value out of them as well. But I know that projects like ours work well, and if we can work towards greener development, then that's good. So I just hope that we can kind of get conservation and engineering to work together in planning. Now, since I've been involved in these discussions almost as long as you have been, I'll just remind you that, when we go back to 2012, when we started talking about controlling water around properties, there were a lot of developers who were against what we were doing, and they thought it was terrible. And at the same time, there were properties that were getting flooded because some of the developers did not do a good job. So, and I think the regulations that we came up with worked quite well. They were common sense, and I hope that we can do the same thing with trees. Yes, I totally agree with you. Anyone else? No extra cost. Martial Como, I'm on 28 Robichaud. I live on 28 Robichaud, and I'm very encouraged by what I'm hearing tonight. We're off to a good start. I have a question. No, we talked about land. There was no policy, with lots that have no trees on them, or that I'm wondering if we shouldn't be working towards a strategy to improve the green cover on those lots that don't have any trees at all. Well, as I said, the funds that we'll collect, if there is planting that is needed in a certain area, those funds will help us pay for that. We'll be able to add to what we already have in terms of planting programs. We'll be able to develop budgets from that dedicated fund for planting efforts. I think that would be very helpful because, some of those lands have been left void of trees. So, I think the city has made a lot of progress over the last decade in terms of tree planting. Just in terms of last year, Dieppe planted more than 5,300 trees. Now, some people don't know that, but it's a reality. So I think you have to be careful it's a very large topic, as we've heard already, all the whole question of protecting trees. It's a huge undertaking, but we've committed to do this, and we've been committed for a long time. And as I said, there are some people who are here tonight. We were delayed by the pandemic, of course, like many other people. We had planned for that position for 3 years in our budgets, but we were able to hire somebody finally, and we hope that he stays with us. But then we're very proud of where we've come. We've already told other municipalities and communities in New Brunswick and Fredericton, and I talked for a half an hour on this topic, and we told all the other communities in New Brunswick about what we were preparing to do, because I'm convinced that when we put this in place, it's going to put a lot of pressure on all the other communities in New Brunswick specifically, but I hope as well in the Atlantic region. All right, thank you. Well, thank you for all the efforts that you've made and that you've been doing for a number of years. So, bravo. Anyone else? Sorry, there is something I wanted to come back and I wanted to mention. When we talked about subdivisions, setting aside 10% or a sum or an amount of money for trees, I hope that the emphasis will be more on protecting land and less on you know, sometimes rather than on asking for money. Well, listen, I'm going to be honest here. I think there's a lot of residents that have to, look at themselves in the mirror before they criticize us in our efforts for protecting trees. We've implemented a lot of measures, and a lot of people come here, they buy a new property, and we're here to help people and encourage them, but we're not going to go and plant the trees ourselves. So some people have to, look what they themselves have done around their house. And I'm not shy. When people come to my house, I have lots of trees, both in the backyard and in the front yard. But, all right. Anyone else? As I said, there's no cost to ask questions. All right, well, listen, if you have some trees, come and plant them along La Tranquille Street. Well, we can't do the developer's job. Developers have work to do as well, and we will continue to have discussions with them so that they do what they're supposed to do as well. And I'm not talking about you, no. Hello. Paul Albert. Therese. No, I don't think you answered the question. There was a question asked on, is the city of Dieppe interested in buying land for conservation? I know, it's part of the strategic plan of the city and your master plan to promote sustainable development and promote the environment and to be a greener city. But I know that the city has parks and trails and land and property. But when we're looking at private land, if we set objectives, if the city sets objectives to encourage the acquisition by philanthropical association or groups, or when lands are deemed ecologically valuable for the city, is there going to be an effort to encourage the acquisition of those lands? And that's the question that I wanted to ask. We're always looking to acquire land. There was a master plan that was developed last year, and something that's changed is that our city has expanded inside. There are new entities in New-Brunswick, and so we're looking at this and then looking at the impact on our territory. We're always looking to increase our green spaces. We've got the Rotary Park, which has already kind of grown to as much as it can. We always have Dover Park, which is quite a large park, and we're looking at other areas with the new territory as well. So staff is going through is doing that exercise. So there should be reports on the potential of the future. So there's always a desire to kind of increase our green spaces so that residents can go and enjoy nature and do activities if they want to walk and cycle. All right, with the continued growth of Dieppe, we don't all want to end up in Rotary Park. That park has kind of reached its maximum yet. My second question is, all right, since the bylaw is not going to apply to the rural areas, it's good that we said that zoning does not allow for densification, but the problem is that land will be purchased by individual for purposes of future developments. And those individuals can apply for zoning changes in the future. But I think we should kind of think ahead and anticipate what's going to happen in these zones are not developed yet, but they will lose all their kind of environmental qualities, things that we don't see in the city. The concept of the urban forest, for example, there's a lot of land that belong to individuals, private landowners that has yet to be developed. But if we want an urban forest, we have to acquire land that will be considered forest, not just land with trees on it. And I think there's a distinction to be made. Well, currently, we're looking at making an integrated plan, and we're actually doing that. Alexandre and his team are working with a consulting firm right now. And we should be able to present that report in the coming months to municipal council, if I remember correctly, Alexandre. So we're doing that exercise already, and we will be incorporating changes into the plan.
I'd like to congratulate you for the presentation. It was excellent. It was well thought out. It was very serious, and we're all so pleasantly surprised on the project and how open the city is to get involved on that path towards a green canopy and the environment. Thank you once again.
Personne d'autre?
Nobody else? Everybody's shy. Well, just a few words to wrap up. Just a reminder that on May 8th, oh, sorry, Alexandre, you wanted to add something? Yeah, I just said there is information. There's an information sheet here that you'll be able to pick up on your way out. It's just a summarize. So starting tomorrow morning, and you'll find it on the website, you'll get the presentation and the documents. On May 8th, that's the next important stage for first and second reading of the bylaw. Council will receive the document, the full document. It will be available to the public following that. And then we'll see if there are any amendments that come. If not, the bylaw will be adopted very quickly. But if we need amendments, or if there are other steps, the staff will, or if we receive a lot of comments, the staff will summarize all of these comments, and they will provide it to council. And then we'll be able to have reading in the entirety, and third reading, and the final reading of the project. So those are the next steps. And like everybody is very eager to see this bylaw in place and to see the city develop while respecting nature. Thank you. Thank you. A lot of people are looking at what we're doing here. So we're going to have pressure on us to deliver. We've always delivered, but we want to make sure that we are successful. We're very proud of our city, and we're all very involved. We appreciate your contribution here this evening, and please do feel free to contact the persons that you met here today, this evening, with for the first time. I think that everybody is full of energy and eager to talk to you again. We'll continue to have this bylaw, this important bylaw, move ahead. Thank you, and have a good evening to all.